Sheila, I want to start with this. Like, what is your take on the emotional sort of weight that comes with this decision, right? Full-time care in the home, in a community. Like, what makes it such an emotionally loaded topic and so difficult?
Well, I think it hits you at a time when you're already physically and emotionally drained, right? So you're tired, you're doing all the things, and then this wave of emotions comes. And I see it across everybody. There's some common emotions: fear, doubt, worrying about loss or loneliness, guilt, embarrassment, shame, like all the things. And it's worries about so many different aspects about your finances or how people are looking at you or like how is it going to work. It's exceptional. I think this is one of the hardest emotional times as a family caregiver.
Agreed. Agreed. For me, I don't know how people out there feel, but for me, well, first of all, and we talk about this a lot, right? Like it's never just one emotion, or like it wasn't for me. It's not like this emotion comes in and that does its thing and then leaves and then this other one fills it, takes its place. It's such a stew of emotion, or it was
Yeah.
for me in my experience. But guilt was like as this was emerging, as it was becoming clear, and in my situation, mom lived 3 hours away, I'm going back and forth, she's living alone, it was clear that she needed to be in a more supportive environment, whether that meant be with us or in a senior living community. I wanted it to be with us because I think, I fell sorta into the societal norm, right? Like, "Oh, we." Anyway, we'll talk more about that in a second, but when it became clear that a community was right for my mom, I felt this guilt
Yeah.
that, like, was unlike any other guilt that I had felt, so I'm glad you mentioned that one, and then that frustration came in because it was not an easy the process itself is emotional, right? Like, when you're
Yeah.
trying to make the decision.
Right. Right.
So, I mean, it just that stew was really it made it so much harder, I guess, and
I think
heavier.
it's so important to bring that up because it as soon as one leaves you, you get the other one. That guilt, I think, is one of the biggest ones that we see. I mean, there's a lot of them, and it's not like one is higher priority than the other or shows up more than another. But this sense of I shouldn't have to do this. I should be able to come up with a different solution that doesn't affect the norm. And it's just that frustration is just so hard to handle and deal with and sort of let go of the idea that it has to stay the way it is, or else it's going to be too difficult, too hard, whatever.
Yeah. I um, let's talk about that because there's this emotional fog, let's say, or stew that sort
Right.
of shrouds this entire point in time, right?
Right.
Or junction for a caregiver. And it looks different for everybody, I would imagine. I think
Yeah.
there are probably some common threads. But then the reality of it, though, it's interesting because, like, the reality of it, there is no right answer. There's only
Right.
what's right for you and the person you're caring for and your extended family,
Yeah.
right? And it's so hard to see that because of that emotional fog. See what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
You keep thinking that there has to be a way out of this thing. And when you're like you're right, when you're foggy and you can't think clearly anyway because of all the other things. I think the thing that we miss is that sort of underlying this is that the reality is that humans are wired to choose the most familiar thing, even when it's not the most ideal thing. So
mhm,
most of us would rather stick with what we know than take a chance on something new. Because even when that new option might be better in the long run, we tend to default to what's familiar because it feels easier. It feels certain. It feels like something that's easier for us to handle than something we have no idea of.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And, like, I think another part of this is, it's very fluid. Like, I think social media and sort of online life added to this for me too. So,
Yeah.
like, I hear everything you're saying, and then I would be all right. And then, like, the process for me to get my mom moved or transitioned, I should say, was months,
Sure.
closer to a year than it took a long time, and there were a lot of different sort of stages to it. And every time I felt like I was coming to peace and saying, "Okay, Matt, you're doing the right thing," I would, someone would make an unintended or intended sometimes remark, like offhanded, like, "Oh, I would never, you know, put my mom in a home," or it'd be
Right.
an online comment on Facebook or something like that. And those just would send me for a loop, right? But the reality of it was, in our situation, it broke down to this. Mom refused to come live with us, my wife and
Yep.
our kids. We had to honor that. The only option was her moving to, in her case, an assisted living community that had memory care,
Mm.
because she was living with Alzheimer's. She was a very social person, like, that was part of who she was, so, like,
Yeah.
she wasn't gonna get that here with us,
Yep.
sitting at home while I work all day, right?
Mhm.
It just that was what was right for her, full
Right.
stop, right? So,
Yeah.
but when you're in the midst of it, it can be really, really difficult.
Yeah, and I like how that you mentioned a little bit earlier that there's no right or wrong answer. It's really easy to think that this is concrete and then there's a certain path. Everyone is working within their own capacity, within their own history and current experience. You had a family, so there's so many different things coming on into that decision. And also your personal relationship and the dynamic of your loved one and you. So all of these things, it's not the same for anyone. And I think we have to give ourselves a little bit of a break and say, all right, given the situation, what are my options? And then move forward with those.
Yeah, yeah. Agreed, agreed. There's a question I wanna see I see here. There are a couple, first one I wanna get to those, and this one hits my heartstrings. I feel like I lived this, but how do you deal with the very reasonable guilt of leaving them in a tiny room with no kitchen or living room that feels claustrophobic to them at an assisted living home due to money?
Yeah. Wow. So hard. Money, is a sense of security for people, right? So it's like you have to feel secure. And all I could say is that you're making the best decision that you have in the moment and that today's decision may be different tomorrow. So if you can kind of reframe it in your mind and say, this is what I'm doing right now, because it's the option that we have, and it has to do with the money or whatever circumstances are around that. Tomorrow might be different. And it's really about just shifting that thought as I am doing the very best that I can. It's hard, I know. It's really
Mhm.
hard. But it's like what are the alternatives? And is your mom safe? Could that situation have realistically continued in whatever that was, whether she was home alone or with you? Is it realistic to think that that could have gone on for a long time? And just
Mhm.
all these questions that you have to ask yourself. And I feel my heart goes out to this
Yeah.
person because it is so difficult.
Yeah, and so my I kind of had a very similar um experience, and had to deal with had to sort of manage feeling similar to what the person who asked the question is describing. My mom went from her home to a, one room
Yeah.
uh, place in her memory care community. No kitchen. My mom left to cook. So there's the question asker. I'm sort of getting really in the weeds on this question, but I think it's important. They use the word guilt.
Mhm.
So guilt, how do you deal with the guilt? And I think she said very reasonable guilt, and it is. It's totally valid for you to feel guilty, but uh, because it's valid, your feelings are valid no matter what they are. But this guilt, you didn't do anything to cause your mom being in this situation. So in that respect, guilt in this case, it's valid for you to feel that way. But hopefully, eventually, me understanding that I didn't do anything to put my mom in that spot, that let me let go of guilt for the most part, and let me let it go. Now, it didn't make it any less sad. I was
Yeah.
still sad seeing my mom in that room, right? So, I like no magic wands, as we always say here. But the guilt is much more harder. It was for me anyway. It was much more difficult to deal with as an emotion.
Yeah.
Really ate me up. I don't know if
Yeah.
others have that experience. Sadness, not a lot of fun either, but it was different. It was more manageable to me, if that makes sense.
Right.
Um,
And we don't wanna just come up with all these tips and tricks and because there are things you can do. There are things to make the situation, more palatable for your mom and, like but I don't wanna sort of focus on that as much as I do handling the managing the guilt.
Yeah,
Because one thing that I could give you a little bit of guidance on is when those feelings of guilt come in, what are they saying? And understand that guilt loves to lie. So whatever that thing is, that the sentence is, like, "You put your mom here," and whatever you're hearing, is that true? Like, in your heart, is it really true that there was a you had more control over this than you do? I mean, you really do have to give yourself a break and understand those thoughts that come in that create guilt are usually lying to you, and we believe them. I don't know why but we do.
yeah, agreed. And I guess one last thing on this, it did my mom was living with Alzheimer's disease, so I don't know what the question asker's situation is, but, bringing sort of lots of photos, a couple of her favorite plants, doing what I could around the on the edges to make
Yes,
this much smaller space feel like home to mom, feel familiar, fill it with
right.
familiar faces. That did seem to help, and she did adjust,
That
but
does make a difference.
but
It
it but
does,
it but it's a process, it takes some time.
and I like how you say around the edges, Matt, because that's kind of what it is. Like, they're still at the heart of it. This is not what everybody wants, but
Correct.
there are little things you could do. With my mom, it was bringing her paints in. She was an artist and so it's like finally she had life again. There was something that she could pull from her previous life. And it could
Mhm.
be little tiny things, but, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So there's another question here. So what's transpired so far? So we've sort of level set on the emotional load of this topic. It's insanely emotionally heavy in my opinion, but we've talked about how that like emotional fog of it all sort of what that's covering, right? The reality of the situation, which is, there is no universal right answer. There's only what's right for you. But
Mhm.
let's go a little deeper here. And I see a couple questions, Sheila, that I think will help us do this. But let's talk about how we as the family caregiver can sort of work through this in a way that feels maybe a little bit more manageable and in a way that we can feel a little bit more confident about. Right.
Mhm.
So to get us there, I want to start with one question. Um, Maybe a little bit of a non sequitur, but it's close to my heart. How do you convince a person with dementia that they need care when that is not their reality, their perceived reality?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, well, that's always gonna be that's one of the fundamentals of talking with someone with dementia is really trying to get to the emotion behind the words they're saying or understanding that their reality is different than yours. And, I think one of the most important things, no matter what their circumstance is to say that, "I know that you don't agree. I'm hearing that, and I understand how hard this is. Um, I'm seeing things day to day that worry me, and I need to make sure that you're safe." We always go back to those I statements. So it's
Mhm.
validating how they feel, understanding whatever circumstance they're in. Sometimes they can't really formulate thoughts and words the way that another person could, but it's finding a way to get the communication coming through that makes sense to them and understanding also that people don't have to reach full agreement. The goal is not to have a consensus, is to make the safest, most thoughtful decision that you can, period. And there are everybody sees it in a different way. And they're seeing different aspects of the situation. So it's kind of like inching your way forward, like you were saying, and just sort of feeling things out.
Yeah. And, with dementia and some other conditions, this is actually really common. Like anosognosia is, as something that actually is happening in the brain that leads people to, it gives them a blind spot. They don't
Right.
see what they need. This happens. Everything that you said, Sheila, is spot on. And I really want to so I did two things because I lived this question as well. And the I statements and making it about both of us, but me heavily, right? Like I couldn't do this. I needed help and I need to make sure she's safe and enjoying her life. That was the other part of it.
Yeah.
Those are the things that ultimately got my mom to say yes,
Yeah.
but she was not happy about it. and it was not a smooth, getting her there was not smooth, even though she agreed. But I will say she did adjust quite quickly, actually, not overnight, but before too long, she wound up loving it there.
Of
That's not to
course.
say everyone will, but
Right.
I just want to put that out there for the question asker.
Now, do
Um,
you remember what it was that finally was the tipping point for her, or was it just time?
I think it was time, and I think it was this. In my mom's case, she was extremely social.
Yeah,
Um, it was the social connection, I think,
right.
that she really grew to love. Yeah. But there's another question, and this leads us right into sort of, the last thing we wanted to talk about, Sheila, which is getting, like, how can we reframe our thinking to make this a little more manageable and help us help us find what's right for us with a little more confidence.
Mm,
And this person says, what are the many parameters used to make the decision? Like, for example, money, health of the
mhm,
person, location or distance from significant other. Is the
right,
caregiver working alone or with other support tools or other siblings? Right. And
right.
my answer to this is yes. All those
Yeah.
are, you're hitting on those key factors, right? So what would you say to that?
I really love the way that that question is framed because it's super easy then to go down through the emotions that are coming through for you. So if you're feeling fear, what's the fear about? Is it about money? What's the solution there? What are all the options? And then it might be around safety or quality of the care and trusting unfamiliar people. So let's think that through. Is that what's bothering me? So you can walk through the different ways to ensure a little bit more safety as far as, feeling more secure about the care or whatever it is that's making you worried about that. Are you afraid that their routines are going to be disrupted and people aren't going to understand their preferences? How can we address that? So, all of these things, it's really important to name the emotion, try to figure out what's pointing to, and or maybe it's just you're feeling like you're going to be lonely, you're going to miss them. There's going to be a separation thing on either side. So, I think naming what the issue is, coming up with the root cause of it, and then it's much easier to come up with some kind of tips or ways to work toward finding a solution for those things. I love that question.
Uh, I do too. And it does come down to, I find the order interesting as well. Like, money was the first thing on our list. And let's be real. I mean, money is it's a huge factor in this. Regardless of what the financial situation is, you know, it's possible to find options, I guess, is something that I'd put out
Right.
there. The options may vary, of course, but w- w- so that leads me to say, like, the second item they had on the question was, what does the person that needs care, what are their needs? Right. So what are their
Yep.
needs today? What are their needs tomorrow?
Right.
What are their needs next year? Right. So it's not just what are their needs right now, it's what are their needs in the future. It's
Yep.
what are your needs also? Like, do you work? Do you have a like, like, can you do this? Right? Do you have
Right.
help? Like, and it's not, no one should have to do this alone. It's not,
Mm,
so it's all of those things. Plus it's in addition to the person's healthcare needs, it's what are their quality of life needs? Are they social like my mom was? Are they not? Are they, like, what do
right.
they need as a person
Yep.
today and in the future, right? So it's all of this.
Yeah, and I love that you brought up options because I think we tend to get really tunnel visioned in the situation to go, and the feeling is sort of like, well, this is it for the rest of life. This is what
Mhm.
this looks like, and it doesn't have to. Like you said, there are options. There are things will change, things will evolve and shift, but in that moment, it's hard to see it. But I do think it's important to make some kind of movement toward thinking about it because I know a lot of people who say, "I'm just not going to think about that right now." And it's so important to realize that that question that you asked, is what we're doing now sustainable in the long run? And if not,
Mm.
can I make a decision now rather than when I have to make it?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So I wanted to just, I would love all the questions. So we've clearly struck a chord here, but there's another question, follow up to one that was asked earlier, around sort of when a person with dementia, doesn't believe they need help or doesn't believe they need care.
Right.
So they say, which way is better between a nursing home and bringing caregivers into the home? And
Right.
I love this question because there is no better. It's
Right.
what is right for you, what makes the most sense, and what determines that is deeply personal, but it's driven by, correct me if you feel differently, Sheila, but the financial situation, the care needs of the person receiving care currently and in the future,
Right.
right? Your needs as a primary caregiver. Can you live life? You shouldn't have to stop every other aspect of your life to care for your loved one. So it's all of that stuff. But just to reiterate, I'm a firm believer. I think you agree, Sheila, but I don't want to speak for you. A firm believer, there is no right answer. There's what
Right.
is right for you.
And right now. So, I mean, I
Correct.
really wanna get back to that because people think, like, they have to make a decision that's going to last forever, so they were not gonna make any decision at all. Just make a choice based on your capacity, all the things we talked about, their needs, the quality of life, and move forward on it. See how it goes. You could change your mind. You've had that experience, Matt, where you tried something with a loved one and it didn't work, so you shifted.
Correct.
So,
Yes.
important
Yeah,
to
actually, yeah, my father-in-law, we tried it. We tried an assisted living community. It did not work, and we pulled the plug.
Yep.
So yeah, absolutely. Okay, I'm looking at the clock. We have 2 minutes. There is
Mm.
one other question, so Sheila, I'm gonna get to, but in the meantime, if you could think about your last thought for the group.
Yeah.
But there was a question around, it was a first time attendee here. Welcome, by the way. And they were asking if we send caregivers into the homes or we just provide advice and support over the phone and chat. And it's the latter. So we do not send caregivers into the home. That's not what Carallel does. We are in your corner as you're caring for your loved one. We're your support system. So the person you call when you need to vent or you need help finding caregivers to bring into the home. You need help finding programs to help you do that for maybe in a less expensive way, or you need to find other sorts of services in your local market. We are the people you call anytime you need to vent or need help with something. And we complement that one-on-one support that's provided largely over the phone. We complement that with the Carallel app, which is available on any device. That it's full of resources and tools that can help you learn things, do things, etc. And then we complement all of that with conversations like this one. And then Sheila runs weekly online support groups. So similar to this conversation, but a little more detailed, a little smaller group and a little more intimate and truly a support group. So hope that answers your question. Sheila, what are your last thoughts here?
Well, I think that, as I mentioned, a lot of people are afraid to make any decision, and they find themselves waiting for things. Something will change, and then I'll know what to do. But if you're finding yourself waiting and hoping things will change, please come back to, is everyone safe the way things are right now? And can this situation realistically continue? And if you could start with those questions, I think you'll have a better framework as to moving forward, even in a small direction, or calling us and asking for assistance on what
Mhm.
to do.
I love that. I have nothing to add to that actually, Sheila. I think that's framed absolutely perfectly and gives you, cuts to the core of what's most important. I'd sort of reiterate the last bit that you talked about, which is all of the questions we've talked about today and everything we've talked about, like these these are heavy, heavy topics that really they lend themselves to, you know, just real honest one-on-one conversations, and our care advocates can help you sort of think through this stuff and craft a plan to get you to what's right for you on this topic and any other. So just keep that in mind in the future. Hope you found this helpful, and thanks for being here. Thank you,
Take
Sheila.
good care. Bye
Bye
bye.
now.